Hello everyone, it's Shannon for Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's technique video, I will be playing with design and making diagonal split panels. Split panels are a fun and easy way to kind of vary your card layouts. I'm going to be showing you two different takes on this idea, so you want to stay tuned to the very end. I'm using the Pretty Wing stamp set and the Pretty Wing dies, as well as the Pretty Foliage stamp set. I'm going to start with the Pretty Foliage stamp set, and I'm using that largest vine, and I've already mounted it onto my acrylic block. I'm using two shades of distressed inks today, or I'm sorry, distressed oxides, I apologize. I'm using peeled paint and Lucky Clover. First thing I'm going to do is going to kind of decide how much I want of that vine inked up. So I kind of have my finger marking the spot where I'm going to stop inking it. You'll see it here a little better. My index finger is marking that spot, or my pointer finger is marking that spot. And now I'm just inking up the edges in the Lucky Clover. And then I will stamp this on my panel. Now this panel is 110-pound white cardstock, but it isn't an A2 panel. So it is not 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. It's actually a little bit smaller. I removed 1/16 from the top and one of the vertical sides. So it's just a tiny bit smaller. That 1/16 is going to be the gap width that I'm going to have in between my split pieces from this panel, because I will eventually cut this panel and split the pieces apart. And you can make this a little bit bigger, or I should say you can make this panel a little bit smaller, therefore making your gap a little bit bigger if you want. You can cut it down 1/8 if that's a little bit easier for you. So you just remove 1/8 from the top and 1/8 from one of the vertical sides, and then your gap will be 1/8 wide. So you have a little bit of control over how big your gap. So I just wanted a nice thin gap. So you see I repeated stamped that vine, so I have this kind of radiating vine shape. And I did overlap a little bit in the center, but that doesn't matter because I will cover those up with some flowers. So now I'm going to move on to those flowers I was talking about. These flowers are from the Pretty Wing stamp set. I'm going to ink this up in some more Distress Oxide colors. This is Seedless Preserves. I'm going to stamp this first on a scrap of white cardstock, and after I stamp this, I'm going to pick up the stamp and then rotate it. I'm rotating it so I can kind of see, because I'm going to stamp this again directly on top of this, and I want the second generation stamping to be kind of in between the petals of the first generation. So I'm rotating it till I can kind of see it mostly in between. I think this kind of creates a nice kind of like a mum look, like those flowers, kind of a fall. I was going for kind of fall colors here, so, and then mums always make me think of fall. And now I'm just switching to another color for the last flower. This is Spiced Marmalade, and same thing, all three flower sizes I did do the second generation stamping, rotating it when I did do that second generation stamping to get a little bit, fill in that flower a little bit more. I'm now stamping the center of the flowers in antique linen. And then I will move on to a butterfly. So I have a butterfly also from the Pretty Wing set. These are layering butterflies, so there are 4 layers to this butterfly, including the body. I'm stamping the wings first, the largest layer, and then I'll stamp in the little wing detail here. So that first layer of the butterfly stamped in Candied Apple. Then I used Seedless Preserves to do the detail on the wings. Sorry, my big head got in the way. This bottom part of the wing I'm doing in Spiced Marmalade, and then the body is just Versa Fine Onyx Black ink. So I went ahead and die cut that butterfly out using the matching dies for the Pretty Wing set. And now I'm going to fussy cut these flowers out. This is because I did that second generation stamping, and this image no longer matches the matching dies. So I'm just going to fussy cut this out. My tricks for fussy cutting is I like a small pair of scissors. I am using 110-pound cardstock, which a lot of people don't like to use thicker cardstock. I don't have any problem with that. I do have my cardstock wedged right down in the very center of my, the deepest I can get my paper in. I start cutting there, and then I rotate frequently. Okay, so now I've got all my elements, all my flowers and butterfly done. I'm going to now create my split panel. So what I'm going to do is take this ruler and I'm just going to draw a line, and I want to make sure that line goes through the very top and the bottom of my panel. And now I'm going to draw my second line, and I'm just eyeballing it here to make it perpendicular. But I do want to also make sure that that line that I create goes through one side and out the other side. This is just going to make sure when you split these panels apart and pull them apart, your gap is even. So I've got my lines. Now I'm going to take it over to my paper cutter and cross this out, or cut this out. So I've cut it out, and I'm going to start to adhere these onto an A2 panel of kind of a sagey green cardstock. And I'm just going to use the edges of the panel to help me get everything nice and straight. And because I cut this panel a little bit smaller, like I mentioned before, it's 1/16 smaller than a regular A2 panel, I'm going to have this little gap in between when I pull the pieces apart and line them up to the edges of the A2 panel beneath it. So nice little detail there. I really like how the split panel design kind of draws you into the center focal point. I think it's a fun way to kind of change your layouts a little bit. So now I'm kind of arranging my flowers and the butterfly, seeing where I want everything to lay, and then I'll start to adhere these down. I'm going to use some glue first. This is Tombow Mono multi-liquid adhesive. I'm just going to glue down that medium flower, and then the other flowers and the butterfly I'm going to mount on foam tape just to add a little bit more dimension. And then after I add these all down, the last thing I have to do is stamp my sentiment. So I've got my design pretty much done. Now all I have to do is stamp my sentiment. I'm going to use my MISTI just to ensure that I get it nice and straight and I don't make a mistake at this point, because that would really stink because all the work is pretty much done here. So get my sentiment lined up there, and I'm going to stamp this in VersaFine Onyx Black. Just going to ink it up and stamp this, and I will stamp this twice just to make sure it's nice and dark and crisp. And then all I have left to do after I stamp my sentiment is mount this panel onto my A2 top folding card base, which I'll do once that sentiment dries a little bit. Now I'm going to move on to the second card here. So for the second card, I'm going to use this is the Fruity Thank You stamp set and the Fruity Thank You matching dies. And I'm going to use a single image from this Popping In stamp set, the books from that stamp set, and the matching dies for the Popping In stamp set. I'm going to start with all my images. I'm going to mount them in my MISTI because I'm going to stamp them a couple times in Memento Tuxedo Black. I'm using this ink now because I'm going to do some Copic coloring, or I should say alcohol marker coloring, and this ink, Memento Tuxedo Black, is alcohol marker friendly. I'm just stamping it a couple times on a scrap of 110-pound white cardstock. So there I got the girl and the apple from the Fruity Thank You stamp set, and the books are from the Popping In stamp set. I'm starting with a Copic marker. This is R17, and I'm going to color this just like an apple, a nice red apple. This is going to be a teacher thank you card. I'm also going to be using my Ohuhu markers. That's what I'm using right now. So I've promised a review about these, and I've done this I've worked with these for a while now, and I do like these Ohuhu markers. The best point about them is they're cheap. You can get 80 of them for $40 on Amazon. The ink is pretty good. The downfalls I see are the tips, the nibs. It only has a bullet and a chisel side, and Copics have a brush nib. And I really like the brush nib. It's much easier to achieve smooth gradations with the brush nib. So that's a big downfall, is the tips on the Ohuhus. There's only a bullet and a chisel. And then there's no refills on the Ohuhus. So if you have a color that you really like, there's no way of refilling it. And then you might have to, If you really liked it, you would have to purchase, I guess, a whole nother 80 pack. I'm not really sure. So that's a big downfall with these Ohuhus, I think. And there's just not enough medium shades. So I have the 80 pack, and even still I find myself not having the right shades. So overall, I think if you not sure if you want to use alcohol markers or include alcohol markers, and $40, or if there's even a smaller pack of 40 for only 20, so 40 markers for $20. You might want to try these Ohuhus out. I will warn you though that if you like working with alcohol markers, you probably are going to want to get Copics. Copics are, I find blending a lot better, a lot easier to do with Copics. I think it's the brush nib mostly. And I think Copics, if you want to buy Copics, just buy 3 shades of a color that you like. That's the best way, and just slowly build up your collection. Okay, so now I'm going to do some ink smushing. I have a little piece of acetate here that I've smushed down some peeled paint, spritzed it with water, and now I'm smushing that acetate down onto a panel of watercolor cardstock. Because this gets really wet, we want to make sure you use watercolor cardstock. I did try this with the 110-pound cardstock. Too wet for that. Had a lot of warping. So I had to go back to my watercolor cardstock. I do like watercolor cardstock. My only complaint is they're all kind of cream color, and I really like white. So that's why I've been trying to use more of my 110-pound white cardstock instead. But for this, definitely want to use watercolor cardstock. So I smooshed down. I kind of spread it out with the tip of the acetate, as you saw me there. And now I dried it. I heat set it. And now I'm taking some of that Lucky Clover, smushing it down onto the acetate, and then kind of dispersing it around the panel as well. Just kind of creating a colorful background for my my girl and to kind of pop from. So that's all I'm doing here, is just creating a simple kind of smooshed background for my card. And I wanted to show you this too, because I know a lot of people do critters, like to color critters or images, and I think the split panel idea is great for just kind of changing it up, so you don't always have to create a scene for your critters and people or whatever you're coloring. You can also do this smooshed background, which I know a lot of people do, like a watercolor background, but it's nice to kind of change it up with this by splitting the panel. So it's just a little bit different, just something different to try with your design layouts. So I dried it after I did Lucky Clover, did a little bit more peeled paint, and now I'm just taking some water and doing some water droplets, and then picking up the water, which does pick up some of the ink. And I'm gonna let that dry a little bit, and now it's dry. I'm ready to do the split panel just like I did before on my first panel with the pretty foliage image. I'm drawing a line from the top through to the bottom. That's real important. You have to go through top, bottom, and then from one side, right side to the left side, or vice versa. It doesn't matter, but you just want to make sure you go from side to side, and then your second line is top to bottom. And that way it splits evenly. Okay, so I've drawn my lines and I've taken it to my paper cutter now and I've trimmed it down. I have an A2 top folding black card base. I'm going to glue it directly onto my card base this time. Using Tombow Mono multi-liquid adhesive to glue this down. And again, I just cut this watercolor panel a little bit smaller, so it's 1/16 smaller on the top and 1/16 smaller on one of the sides, so I have a small 1/16 gap in between my pieces of my panel. I'm just going to set this aside with some weight on it to dry while I kind of work on my my other elements of the card. So I've cut with craft foam and the matching dies the girl and the apple, and I'm now going to adhere the girl onto the craft foam. This is just going to add a little dimension. It's a little bit easier than using foam tape because especially with this girl, she has very thin arms, so it's a little hard to cut the craft foam for behind her. to cut the tape, the foam tape. So cutting the craft foam makes it a little bit easier to get her completely covered with foam and have nice dimension. I am just going to glue the book straight down. So I'm kind of arranging everything, and now I'll start to glue. And I'll use my glue again, my liquid adhesive, just adding a little bit behind the girl, centering her kind of right over that the middle point of my cross split panel design. And that the split panel really helps to, like I mentioned before, kind of bring your eye in and kind of give you a focal point. It's just a nice way to vary up some of your card designs. So again, I'm going to stamp the sentiment. I'm going to use my Misty again this time, because especially since I'm using watercolor paper, which has a little bit more tooth to it and often requires you to stamp an image or your sentiment a couple of times just to make sure that you stamped it, the entirety of it. So I'm inking it up in VersaFine Onyx Black, stamping it, and I'll stamp it again just to make sure I've got a nice clean crisp image. And that will finish up this card. Clean up that little spot there. And I did kind of make a couple more, and I'll show you at the end just a little bit of variations on what I've already shown you, but this card is done. Just let that dry a little bit and it's completely done. So nice pop, like the background, adds a little bit of color and interest, but the split panel really draws your eye into the image of the girl. And then here's the flower panel again, or the one that I showed you, the flower card. I've already glued it onto my panel, or my card base, I'm so sorry, my card base. And here's two other cards that I made with the same design, just different colors. Great for maybe a gift set. And that's all the cards that I made. I hope you guys enjoyed my video today. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Have a wonderful day.